The energy is then integrated into opposite polar semiconductors where you put a coil around between and on each side of the electromagnetic module and collect the energy. Voila! Free energy. Now I use this energy that I made out of thin air.
He was the world's smartest kid who invented a free energy machine for just $14.
The future that I imagine is the future, frankly, that we all imagine. As cheesy as this sounds, from day one on this planet, I knew that I was put on here for a reason, and that reason is to invent, to bring the future.
Then, Max Loughan vanished. Years later, he has reappeared, but the boy who promised to save the world is gone. In his place is a terrifying warning. The timeline has shifted, and our reality is broken. The boy in the boiler room. Energy builds civilizations, but it also breaks them. As the unseen architect of the modern world, it fuels our greatest achievements while causing our deepest fractures. Wars are waged over it, and ecosystems crumble beneath its weight. Our global addiction to fossil fuels drives the economy, but leaves a legacy of respiratory disease and environmental ruin. Trapping humanity in a cruel paradox, our survival depends on the very force threatening to destroy us. For over a century, the free energy miracle has remained the impossible dream of fringe physics, a hypothetical system offering unlimited power with zero input. Across fringe digital channels, the disillusioned insist that the technology already exists, buried by governments and energy conglomerates to protect profit. A belief system that rests entirely upon Nikola Tesla and his Wardenclyffe Tower, convinced that a blueprint for a post-scarcity utopia was lost to greed. Yet, to the scientific establishment, free energy is nothing more than a myth, a playground for fraudsters peddling blueprints that defy the laws of thermodynamics. But setting aside the internet rumors and the field of fraudsters, a breakthrough of this magnitude, a device capable of ending energy poverty and decoupling growth from carbon emissions, should logically emerge from the laboratories of MIT or the secretive bunkers of DARPA. Such a revolution should require billions in funding, armies of PhDs, and decades of peer-reviewed research. But the innovative mind is rarely predictable. The solution did not come from a government think tank or a corporate giant. It appeared in the suburbs of Henderson, Nevada, from the unlikeliest of persons, a 13-year-old boy, Max Loughan. Max was an anomaly by design. In a world where his peers were consumed by the digital warfare of Call of Duty or the social hierarchies of middle school, Max was navigating the abstract complexities of quantum theory. He didn't just study science, he wore it like a second skin. His white lab coat wasn't a costume for a science fair or a prop for a video. It was his daily attire, which he wore everywhere. To his parents, he was a genius who simply operated on a different frequency than other children. To the outside world, he was a puzzle, a boy who spoke of creating social change and giving light to the world with the solemnity of a tenured professor. His laboratory reflected this singular obsession. It was not a sterile, high-tech facility funded by venture capital. It was a converted utility room in his parents' house. Max's motivation, however, was startlingly clear. It was neither profit nor patents. It was the 68 million displaced people worldwide who lacked access to basic electricity. For him, the invention was a commitment to safety, literacy, and the fundamental human right to light, a solution to the problems that adults seemed content to ignore. The device at the center of this ambition was the Energy Horizon Gatherer, or EHG. Just like Max, the machine was an anomaly. It did not look like the future of energy. It looked like the contents of a recycling bin hot-glued together by a bored teenager. The chassis was an old coffee tin. Inside, a spoon acted as a component alongside copper coils and basic circuitry. Max claimed the device worked by harvesting ambient energy, radio waves, thermal energy, and static electricity naturally present in the air, and converting it into usable direct current. It was a harvest of the invisible. The total cost of materials was a mere $14, the price of a fast food lunch. Max explained the mechanism with disarming simplicity. He insisted he wasn't creating energy, a feat forbidden by the laws of physics, but rather harvesting it. In his view, the atmosphere was already saturated with invisible power, radio waves, thermal energy, and static electricity. His device, he claimed, acted as a specialized antenna, catching this ambient energy and channeling it into a usable current. It was, in essence, an electromagnetic harvester, turning the invisible flux of the universe into usable energy. The implications of such a claim were staggering. If a $14 device made from a coffee tin could illuminate a room, the potential for scale was limitless. A house-sized version could theoretically power a neighborhood. A city-sized version could power a nation. If the EHG worked as promised, it meant the end of energy poverty. It meant that the 68 million displaced people Max sought to help could have instant, free access to electricity. It would render the complex, polluting infrastructure of the modern world obsolete overnight. But this promise carried a heavy shadow. A device that pulls free electricity from the air does not just light bulbs, it burns down economies. If energy becomes free, utility companies go bankrupt. The oil and gas industries, which underpin the geopolitical balance of the globe, would collapse. When a teenager in a lab coat invents something that threatens to destroy a trillion-dollar status quo, the world takes notice. And, historically, that kind of attention is rarely benevolent. The media firestorm and the Tesla label. The story of the boy in the boiler room didn't just go viral, it went nuclear. Max Loughan wasn't just a viral sensation, he was validated by the adult world. He spoke at the United Nations, at SXSW Eco, and sat as a featured judge at the World Science Festival. The media anointed him the next Tesla, a prodigy whose intellect intimidated the adults in the room. But the spotlight always brings fire. As Max's fame exploded, so did the scrutiny. Scientists ignored the fairy tale and focused on the hardware. Their verdict was swift and brutal. The Energy Horizon Gatherer wasn't a miracle. It was a mere radio. Critics based their entire argument on one simple, inconvenient fact. Max lived less than half a mile from a massive AM radio tower. They argued the device wasn't harvesting mysterious ambient energy. It was simply intercepting the powerful broadcast signal right next door. The copper coils acted like a net, trapping the radio waves. The lights ignited not because of free energy, but because Max was standing next to a giant, unlicensed transmitter. To the skeptics, this wasn't a breakthrough. It was an old science class experiment known for decades. Yet, the critics were asking the wrong question. Even if the machine was just a simple radio, the mind behind it was undeniable. Max didn't waste time arguing about circuits. He spoke only of the future. While the adults were busy explaining how the device worked, Max was already looking past electricity, turning his gaze toward the nature of the universe itself. The boiler room was just the beginning. The real invention was Max himself. The 3-year silence. In 2018, Max Loughan, the next Tesla, simply disappeared, and what followed was 3 long years of silence. That silent void was filled instantly with speculation. The comment sections that once debated his invention now debated his fate. Had the energy lobby bought him out to bury the technology? Had he been silenced by government agents to protect the global economy? Theories grew darker, even alleging that he had been recruited by the CIA, his intellect commandeered for classified projects. The silence transformed him from a viral curiosity into a martyr for the online community. The truth was less dramatic, but far more consequential. Max hadn't been erased, he had retreated. The crushing weight of viral fame and the scrutiny of the scientific community forced a withdrawal. But when he finally re-emerged, the boy with the coffee tin was gone. Max was older, sharper, and stripped of his childhood innocence. He had abandoned the energy horizon gatherer and the optimistic promise of free energy. Instead of defending the past, he returned with a new focus, a demeanor suggesting he had seen something the world was ignoring. The return and the warning. When Max Loughan finally broke his silence, the contrast was jarring. Gone was the high-pitched enthusiasm of the boy in the oversized lab coat. The young man on screen was visibly older, his voice deeper, his demeanor stripped of every hint of playful curiosity. His return had nothing to do with free energy or $14 energy harnessers. Instead, he addressed the vague anxiety permeating the internet, the collective sense that reality felt fundamentally wrong, that memories didn't match history. His focus turned thousands of miles away from Nevada to the border of France and Switzerland. He spoke of the Large Hadron Collider, LHC, the 27-kilometer ring of superconducting magnets operated by CERN. It is the most complex machine ever built, dedicated to unlocking the fundamental structure of the universe. He recounted the machine's grim history. It came to full operation in 2008, only to suffer a catastrophic electrical fault just 9 days later, forcing a year-long shutdown. When it was finally recommissioned, it achieved its greatest triumph in 2012 with the discovery of the Higgs boson, the fundamental particle that gives all other particles mass, famously nicknamed the God particle. To the scientific establishment, this was the completion of the Standard Model. To Max, however, it was the moment the stakes for the world became unfathomable. His new theory was not a blueprint for a machine, but a warning about reality itself. He proposed that the high-energy experiments at CERN had done more than just observe particles, they had destabilized the fabric of space-time itself. Max argued that by manipulating the mass of fundamental particles, the LHC had inadvertently caused our original universe to collapse. We hadn't just shifted into a parallel timeline, he claimed. We had plunged into a damaged one. This, he argued, explained the Mandela effect and the pervasive anxiety of the modern era. We weren't just living in chaotic times, we were living in the wrong timeline, survivors of a cosmic accident no one else was willing to admit. The boy who once promised to light the world was now warning us that the world we knew might already be gone. The Mandela memory glitch. Max's warning gave a terrifying structure to a phenomenon that had previously been dismissed as internet trivia, the Mandela effect. For years, millions of people shared specific, vivid memories that contradicted documented history. They remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, despite his actual death in 2013. They recalled the Berenstain Bears spelled with an E or the appearance of a cornucopia in the fruit of the Loom logo, a detail the company insists is false. Before Max re-emerged, psychologists explained these discrepancies as confabulation, the brain's attempt to fill in gaps with false details. But viewed through the lens of Max's CERN theory, these weren't errors. They were residual memories from a timeline that had been overwritten. Max's framework suggests that when the LHC experiments altered the fundamental mass or charge of particles, it shifted the universe onto a new track. The details that didn't align became glitches caused by the imperfect merger of these realities. The people who felt crazy for remembering the wrong history were actually the ones retaining the truth of the original timeline. This explanation transformed the Mandela effect from a party game into a symptom of collective trauma. It wasn't just about misremembering a title, it was about a pervasive sense of dislocation shared by millions, as if humanity had been moved into a house that looked identical to their own, but felt entirely alien. From this seed of doubt grew the darkest interpretation of Max's claims, known online as the "we are dead" theory. This narrative posits that the world didn't just shift during the Higgs boson discovery, it ended. The theory suggests that the energy unleashed in 2012 triggered the instantaneous collapse of the original universe. In this grim scenario, the reality we currently inhabit is not a continuation of life, but a shadow realm or a simulation. While Max never explicitly stated that humanity perished, his discussions about the fragility of our timeline fueled this nihilistic theory. The theory offered a disturbing answer to why the modern world feels so chaotic and surreal. It suggests that the absurdity of recent history is a feature, not a bug, of a simulated reality running on corrupted code. We aren't living in the future we were promised because that future was destroyed. We are merely ghosts haunting a machine that replaced our world, arguing over the spelling of cereal brands while the fabric of existence frays around us. The physics of the shift. Infinity inside infinity. The foundation of Max Loughan's speculative theory required a single point of failure in the architecture of reality. A constant that, if perturbed, could unravel the universe. The constant he settled on was the electron's mass. In the established framework of particle physics, mass is not an inherent property, but a consequence of interaction with the all-pervading Higgs field, an invisible energy field that permeates all of space and imparts mass to particles based on how strongly they interact with it. This interaction gives the electron its precisely measured weight. If that value were to change even marginally, the stability of atomic orbits would be lost. The periodic table would be unrecognizable, and the universe as known would cease to exist. Max correctly identified that changing this foundational property would necessitate a fundamentally different reality. He hypothesized that the Large Hadron Collider, LHC, was the accidental mass manipulator. His narrative suggested the high-energy experiments involving fundamental particles, perhaps the Higgs boson itself, were the cause. Altering the electron's charge, or, crucially, its measured weight, became the trigger. To Max, the scientists at CERN were not simply observing particles. They were inadvertently applying pressure to the very constants that define this universe, leading to a break or a shift. This break or shift, it has been contended, left behind residual memories from a reality where the electron's mass held its original, unperturbed value. The concept of the universe switching versions could not be justified by magic. It required a scientific framework, however speculative. That framework was provided decades earlier by Hugh Everett III, a brilliant and controversial doctoral student at Princeton, through his many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Everett's idea was born from a desire to fix a complicated problem in quantum physics, the concept of wave function collapse. He argued that the entire universal wave function never collapses. Instead of one single reality where possibilities vanish when you observe them, every single outcome is real. Think of it this way. Imagine you're flipping a coin. In the old way of thinking, the coin is both heads and tails until you look, and then it collapses into just one reality, heads or tails. In Everett's many worlds interpretation, when you flip that coin, the universe doesn't choose an outcome. At the exact moment the coin lands, the universe splits. In one new, parallel branch, the coin landed heads. In the other, it landed tails. Both outcomes are equally real, happening in worlds right next to each other. For Everett, time isn't a single line running forward. It's a vast, many-branched tree where every possible choice or quantum event creates a new limb. This means every quantum possibility is realized in its own distinct parallel universe. This idea, initially disregarded, found its champion in theoretical physicist David Deutsch, a founding figure in quantum computing. Deutsch is a prominent advocate for the MWI, arguing it is the most physically plausible explanation for quantum phenomena like interference. His work further developed the concept into one of infinity inside infinity, an infinite landscape of parallel universes constantly being generated, stacked upon one another, yet remaining utterly distinct. In this view, reality is not a single location, but an infinite set of worlds coexisting, where every possibility that can happen does happen. This subtle change in one foundational constant is enough to explain the discrepancies. Those so-called false memories are actually genuine memories from the world next door, a world that was nearly identical, except for a few minor discrepancies. Reality as frequency. If the universe can shift timelines or branch off into infinite variations based on the weight of an electron, it implies that physical reality is not as solid as it appears. To understand how such a shift could occur, one must question the nature of the medium itself. The answer, according to theories embraced by Max Loughan, is that the universe is composed not of hard matter, but of information. This concept was most famously articulated by Michael Talbot, a writer who specialized in science, mysticism, and paranormal subjects in the holographic universe. Talbot, synthesizing the work of physicist David Bohm and neurophysiologist Carl Pribram, argued that the universe is fundamentally a domain of frequency and vibration. In this model, objective reality, the tangible, three-dimensional world we perceive, is actually a projection. The brain functions as a translating device, a biological lens that takes a chaotic cascade of frequencies from a deeper, invisible level of reality, the implicate order, which contains the entire universe in an enfolded pattern, and converts them into the coherent sensory experience of space and time. If the brain interprets frequencies to create reality, then a shift in frequency would result in a shift in the perceived universe. This provides the structural why behind the how of the Mandela effect. If the signal changes, the projection changes. Max didn't stop there. He integrated this holographic worldview into his own unique philosophy, presenting it as a unification of science and spirituality. In his later public appearances, he moved beyond simple energy harvesting devices to discuss what can only be described as spiritual physics. He frequently asserted that the Bible and other ancient texts were not just moral guidebooks, but descriptions of quantum mechanics and the structure of the universe, simplified for the understanding of their time. He equated God not with a deity in the traditional sense, but with pure consciousness, the source of all matter and the underlying fabric of the hologram. Max's belief that God is pure consciousness led directly to his most radical idea, the source code of the universe. He argued that our reality isn't random. It runs on a divine blueprint, a set of fundamental, governing rules. He often pointed to Einstein's energy equals mass times the speed of light squared as an everything equation, interpreting it as evidence of this universal code. Because Max believed he understood this code, he claimed a form of agency over reality that borders on simulation theory. He did not propose hacking the universe in the style of a computer criminal, but rather bending it through consciousness. If reality is just a simulation built on frequency and vibration, then a person who masters their mind can actually change the frequency they're standing on. People aren't fixed observers. They're active players who can literally hop between dimensions or timelines. For Max, the Mandela effect wasn't a glitch, it was a compass. It was proof that our collective consciousness is already navigating the multiverse, constantly shifting from one version of the source code to another. Long before Max Loughan proposed that the universe operates on a source code, the science fiction author Philip K. Dick had already articulated the concept with unsettling precision. Dick, known for works that would inspire films like Blade Runner and Total Recall, spent his career obsessively deconstructing the nature of existence. His narratives frequently featured protagonists trapped in counterfeit worlds, struggling to distinguish between authentic reality and sophisticated illusion. Crucially, for Dick, these were not merely plot devices. They were expressions of a deeply held belief that the physical world was a construct. The defining moment of Dick's philosophy occurred in 1977 at a science fiction convention in Metz, France. Addressing a confused audience, Dick abandoned the discussion of his novels to make a startling declaration about the nature of the world itself. He stated with absolute seriousness that existence was an illusion. "We are living in a computer-programmed reality," he told the crowd. "And the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs." Dick went on to explain his interpretation of déjà vu. While psychologists attribute the sensation to a delay in neurological processing, Dick argued it was a visceral reaction to a shift in the program. In his view, déjà vu was the sensation of the present moment being replayed because a programmer, or a vast, active intelligence, had altered a variable in the past. This alteration necessitated a rewrite of the timeline, creating an alternative branch of history. To the occupants of the simulation, the change would be seamless, except for the fleeting, uncanny sense that they had been there before. The parallel between Philip K. Dick's 1977 speech and Max Loughan's theories is direct and structural. Where Dick spoke of variables being changed by a programmer, Max spoke of the electron's mass being altered by the Large Hadron Collider. Both men described a reality that is not fixed, but fluid, capable of being patched, updated, or rewritten, while the occupants remain largely unaware. Dick's concept of the black iron prison, a false reality trapping humanity, mirrors Max's description of a holographic universe defined by limitations that can be transcended through awareness. Both figures faced a similar reception. Dick's claims were largely dismissed during his lifetime, often attributed to mental instability or substance abuse. Decades later, Max's theories met the same fate, categorized by mainstream science as pseudoscientific or conspiratorial. Yet, the core concept they shared, that reality is information-based and mutable, has slowly migrated from the fringes of sanity to the edges of serious theoretical physics. What Dick called a computer-programmed reality is now debated by philosophers and physicists under the banner of simulation theory. Both men, separated by decades, arrived at the same conclusion. The world is a construct, and the anomalies people experience are not errors in their minds, but evidence of the system at work. The grim pattern. Within the communities that study simulation theory and alternative physics, a grim pattern often emerges, especially as alleged by conspiracy theorists. It is the observation that those who push too far into the mechanics of reality or zero-point energy, frequently meet untimely ends or vanish from the public eye. This phenomenon is often cited by them as the silencing of the pioneers. A chilling precedent for the pattern as observed is Itzhak Bentov. Bentov was a scientist, inventor, and author of Stalking the Wild Pendulum, a seminal work that explored consciousness and the holographic nature of the universe, concepts that mirror Max's own theories. Bentov proposed that consciousness connects all things, and that reality is structured like a hologram capable of being transcended. Just as his work began to bridge the gap between hard science and spirituality, he died in 1979 aboard American Airlines Flight 191, a crash that killed all on board. While officially attributed to mechanical failure, his death is viewed by many in the alternative science community as a removal of a mind that was getting too close to the source code. The pattern extends to those working on tangible applications of these theories, particularly in energy. Stanley Meyer, famous for his controversial water fuel cell, claimed to have built a car that ran on water by splitting it into hydrogen and oxygen. In 1998, while dining with potential investors, Meyer took a sip of cranberry juice, clutched his throat, and reportedly ran into the parking lot, shouting, "They poisoned me!" He died moments later. Although the official coroner's report listed a cerebral aneurysm as the cause of death, the circumstances cemented his status as a martyr for suppressed technology. Similarly, Eugene Malov, an MIT-educated scientist and the chief editor of Infinite Energy magazine, met a violent end. Malov was a vocal proponent of cold fusion and a fierce critic of the scientific establishment's refusal to investigate new energy anomalies. In 2004, he was beaten to death in the driveway of his childhood home. While police attributed the murder to a robbery and property dispute involving a tenant, the timing occurring just as he was urging the U.S. Department of Energy to review cold fusion research fueled persistent speculation that his death was calculated to protect entrenched energy interests. This grim pattern casts a different light on Max Loughan's trajectory. After his initial viral explosion, where he demonstrated an energy harvesting device and spoke openly about the universe's structure, his public presence waned. The narrative among his followers suggests that this was not accidental, but a measure of self-preservation. In a world where the boundaries of physics are strictly policed, either by academic dogma or, as the darker theories suggest, by those managing the simulation, silence is often a survival tactic. Max's retreat from the specifics of his inventions to the safety of vague spiritual metaphors is interpreted as a calculated move to avoid the fate of predecessors like Bentov, Meyer, and Malov. The implication is that investigating the architecture of the matrix is dangerous. Whether by human intervention or a correction within the simulation itself, the pattern suggests that those who try to rewrite the rules often find themselves erased by them. While the tragic histories of figures like Bentov and Malov suggest a dangerous price for forbidden knowledge, the scientific establishment offers a far more grounded perspective: scientific denial and the brain filter. Stepping away from the shadows of conspiracy, the scientific consensus, particularly among researchers at CERN, completely rejects the notion that the Large Hadron Collider, LHC, is responsible for shifting timelines. Official statements confirm the collider operates safely within established physics, recreating conditions from the early universe to understand fundamental particles. While particles do experience relativistic time dilation, a form of time travel, this is a predictable physical law, not a mechanism for hopping between alternate realities. To mainstream science, multiverse theories are unproven mathematical concepts, not real navigable places. However, a completely different interpretation shifts the focus from external physics to internal psychology using the framework of scientist Itzhak Bentov. Bentov argued that the human brain is a powerful filter. Its primary job is to screen out the vast, chaotic majority of reality to prevent our consciousness from being overwhelmed. From this perspective, a perceived glitch in the matrix, or a Mandela effect, isn't an error in the universe's fabric. It's a temporary failure of the brain's filtration system. If an individual's perception momentarily expands beyond its usual limits, a massive influx of raw, unfiltered information floods the mind. The brain, unable to fully translate this expanded data, interprets the feeling as a break in reality. Thus, the anomaly is likely not a shift in the timeline, but a momentary expansion of human awareness that the brain cannot fully translate into a coherent experience. While the internet continues to debate whether reality is broken or the brain is glitching, the boy who started it all has chosen a different path. What do you believe? Is Max Loughan a visionary, silenced by the system, or a genius who simply grew up? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, check out the next video on your screen right now.